right. So the last of the 6 questions is the issue with regard to Jesus, right? And so our authors entitled this section, Jesus, the Alternatives. And so having demonstrated the possibility of the supernatural, the classical apologist is ready now to defend the actuality of the biblical miracles, and in particular, the claims to deity made by and about Jesus. So, for instance, Norman Geisler's argument for the deity of Christ is typical of the classical approach. He basically proceeds in 2 steps. First, Christ claimed to be God, and then secondly, Christ proved himself to be God. So that's kind of typical of the classical approach.
Yeah. If Jesus never claimed to be God, well, then we're going to be a little bit embarrassed once we hit point 2. So we have to start with point 1 there. Well, an alternative form of the argument lays out that all the alternatives to the Christian view of Jesus as God, and then shows that they must be rejected. The simplest form of this process of elimination argument is known as the trilemma, and presents 3 possibilities. So this one's kind of more known coming from C.S. Lewis, but Josh McDowell has used it as well. And so it says that Jesus really was God or Lord. Jesus knew that he wasn't God, therefore a liar, or that Jesus mistakenly thought he was God, and therefore he was a lunatic. Apologists need to say almost nothing in refutation of the second and third views, since nearly everyone recognizes Jesus to have been, at the very least, a person of great wisdom and moral courage. This leaves as only the possibility, though, that Jesus really was God.
Yeah. So Lord, lunatic, or liar, right?
Right.
And so we don't think he was a liar or a lunatic, and therefore that just leaves the Lord, right? And so we're, the trilemma argument, to be complete, however, our authors tell us, it must take into consideration that Jesus did not even claim to be God. So that'd be step 1 of Geisler's argument. Did he claim to be God? Right? So there are 2 lines of reasoning by which non-Christians have denied that Jesus claimed to be God. They have either denied that he made the claims to deity reported in the Gospels, or they argued that these should be interpreted to mean something other than a claim to deity, right? So one clear alternative way of interpreting Jesus' claims to deity is to interpret them in kind of an Eastern religious sense as a mystical, affirmations of a unity with God that all people potentially may realize. So he wasn't claiming to be the God. He was saying all people are part of God and he's just one of them, right? That kind of stuff.
Be perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect. Therefore, you can be perfect just like all of us are perfect. And therefore, all of us are God.
And so what Peter Kreeft and others have pointed out, that there's really a total of 5 possible views of Jesus, right? And so these are the various alternatives that he calls a quintilemma. 5 lemmas.
And he had 8 versions. So, I mean, he's just always going for the extra.
That's right.
Thanks, Pete. We appreciate that. All right. Jesus claims the gospel reports the primary premise of the quintilemma. See, that is a hard word to say. Is that the gospels report Jesus claiming to be God. Perhaps the simplest way of undercutting the argument is to dismiss the gospel reports as historically unreliable. Classical apologists appeal to the same types of evidence in defense of the Gospels as and the rest of the New Testament, as do evidentialist apologists, with the aim of showing that the Gospel accounts of the life, teaching, death, and resurrection of Jesus possesses both authenticity and reliability. Positively, they point to the archaeological and secular testimony to the events recorded in the Gospels, and negatively, they emphasize that there's nothing incredible about the miracle accounts in the Gospels if the existence of God is admitted.
Right. And so then, what about Jesus' claims? What did they mean? Well, the second line of defense against the Christian view of Jesus as God is to argue that they really did not claim to be God in the Jewish sense, right? This is, the Eastern mysticism approach, right? He really wasn't saying he was God, at least not in the Jewish sense. And so although there are various heretical distortions of the biblical teaching that Jesus is God, what we're concerned with here is interpretations that take Jesus's claim completely outside of professing Christian context, right? So in practice, there's really only one such interpretation, that when Jesus spoke or acted as if he were God, this was to be understood in a Eastern pantheistic way, right? A mystical sense. So that is, this view of God was the kind of God is all or in all. And that's what Jesus meant by saying he is God.
Right. Well, then, classical apologists have responded to the theory with a battery of arguments. Peter Kreeft and Ronald Tassili well represented the classical response when they asserted that Jesus could not have been a mystical guru for one very simple reason, because he was a Jew. And so, therefore, he was going to have Jewish beliefs and Jewish presuppositions and Jewish accountability and a Jewish background. So that's point one. That's a pretty big homer for them.
Yeah, really.
Well, they pointed out a number of glaring contradictions between the teaching of Judaism in general and Jesus in particular, and on the other hand, those of mystics and gurus. For instance, the Jewish belief that Jesus taught was a public faith in a personal creator who could be known because he had taken initiative and revealed himself. Eastern gurus taught a secret, mystical experience of an impersonal divine reality in all things that is beyond knowledge, but can be experienced by those who pursue it with religious fervor. So here you have kind of Gnostic belief and Gnostic thinking, which did enter into the church, but only later, 2nd century. And of course, Michael J. Kruger, that I always have to mention, has a great book on this of Christianity in the 2nd century. I'll try to remember to link that below because I'm sure I've done that before as well.
Yeah, good. So notice Jesus couldn't have meant this
right.
God in terms of pantheism, right? Because he had Jewish, he was, as you mentioned, he had a Jewish perspective, Jewish background, Jewish worldview, which is antithetical to this Eastern mysticism type of view of God is all in all. Right. So then lastly, the issue is, and we'll kind of end it here, Jesus' claims, were they true, right? So he claimed to be God, so the issue is, were they true? So if Jesus really did claim to be God, and if he meant this in the Jewish sense of being the personal creator of the universe, then the simpler trilemma comes directly back into play, right? Classical apologists know that if they can reduce the options to these three, liar, lunatic, or Lord, then they will have a convincing case for all but the most jaundiced, hostile opponent of Christianity. The reason is simple. Even the most avowed non-Christians are incapable of convincing themselves, let alone anybody else, right, that Jesus was a deceiver or he was demented. And those really are the choices if Jesus claimed to be God and yet was merely a human being, right? So either he was a liar, lunatic, or indeed he was who he claimed to be, Lord. And so that's where they kind of end this.
Right.